A recent study showed kids born during the pandemic have a around 20-point drop in IQ versus kids born during the decade leading up to the pandemic. Now, this is from a research paper that looked at 672 kids in Rhode Island and looked at kids aged between 3 months and 3 years, and we're looking at the overall mean IQ of the kids in question. So, pre-pandemic, it was about the mean average for IQ was about 100, whereas now it's about 78. And researchers have a number of different ideas as to what might have caused this particular drop in IQ. But first, let's look at what the research had to say about what they saw from this study. We find that children born during the pandemic have significantly reduced verbal, motor, and overall cognitive performance compared to children born pre-pandemic. Moreover, we find that males and children in lower socioeconomic families have been most affected. Results highlighted that even in the absence of direct SARS-CoV-2 infection and COVID-19 illness, the environmental changes associated with COVID-19 pandemic is significantly and negatively affecting infant and child development. And now we can look at what they believe the cause for this drop in IQ is. Since the first reports of the novel coronavirus in 2020, public health organizations have advocated preventative policies to limit the virus, including stay-at-home orders that close businesses, daycares, schools, playgrounds, and limited child learning and typical activities. Fear of infection and possible employment loss has placed stress on parents, while parents who could work from home face challenges in both working and providing full-time attentive care. For pregnant individuals, fear of attending prenatal visits also increased maternal stress, anxiety, and depression. Not surprising, there have been concern over how these factors, as well as missed educational opportunities and reduced interaction, stimulation, and creative play with other children, might have impacted child neurological development. So what we're seeing here is that the stress, the increase of stress, the increase of fear, and all of the measures taken, things like lockdowns, closing schools, pulling kids out of schools, moving it all to online, potentially have affected children. So obviously in this particular study, we're not talking about, we're talking 3 months to 3 years. So they're not necessarily in school. However, you can assume that a lot of this sort of stuff might apply to kids that are in school and that are not having these interactions with their kids. So I just want to make that clear that this study doesn't exactly apply to kids in school right now. That said, one of the things I just want to say real quick off the top, I haven't shared this a whole lot, but over the past year and a half or so, I've been looking a lot into becoming certified as like a trauma specialist, if you will. So what that means is looking at a lot of stuff related to the physiology of a human being, how it functions, how trauma, cumulative stress, environmental stress, all that sort of stuff affects our body, affects our health, affects our nervous system, affects the way we think, right? What changes go on? How do we, heal from that? And a lot of my desire to start studying this stuff came from my own accumulation of stress through what we call the massive censorship period that happened here that completely affected our business in a very negative way, and it became an extremely stressful time. I needed a way out, so I started to become I started my journey on trying to become an expert on this stuff. But we've brought a lot of this stuff into our media over the past while. We've certainly had a lot of this stuff in our media over the past 12 years, but we've focused it a lot more over the past little bit. And with that knowledge, I want to offer to this conversation some really important pieces to the puzzle that I think are key to consider. So number one, on the fear side of things, right? When we have mainstream media constantly pushing fear on people, that creates a psychological effect. That psychological effect changes the way we can think. We no longer think clearly. Our body moves into survival mode. We start interacting with our friends and family differently. The quality of our interaction starts to diminish. The way our tone of voice changes, the way our facial expressions, all these things start to change. Even our ears change. We no longer hear things. We no longer pick out the small details inside people's voices that tell us, that give us a warmth, that give us a connection, that give us a deeper understanding of what somebody is really saying, what they really mean, and where they're coming from. These things start to change the more stressed out we become. So when you consider the fact that we have this massive divide in society, and you look at the fact that mainstream media, for example, and a lot of government policy is just constantly pushing fear on people 24/7, this is going to have a large effect on how people perceive their reality, but also how they now interact with their kids, how they now are available, how they now have the capacity to not only do their job, but operate on a very just human-to-human community level where we're connecting with our kids in a meaningful way. Our capacity to do that is going to limit. So that's one factor here. Another factor here is the fact that when we do look at things like wearing masks, right? If kids are used to having interactions with lots of people in society, and you'll notice kids at the early stages of life, and this is a very, very important part of life in building our ability to really connect with people as well as self-regulate, right? We're talking down at a nervous system level here. What happens is we utilize what we take in, again, from people's tone of voice, but also their facial expressions. Facial expressions convey a lot in terms of warmth, convey a lot in terms of safety, convey a lot in terms of what somebody is thinking or feeling or meaning, and these facial expressions are extremely important. When we are blocking all of that constantly, children are not going to have the exposure at a very, very key point in their life where that exposure means a lot. That exposure has a huge effect on their overall physiology, including their brain. So you could make the argument very clearly that it's possible that with all the extra mask wearing, we are also impacting the cognition of children in terms of removing the amount of stimulation they would be getting in their environments pre-pandemic or pre-mask wearing. So I think there's a strong case to be made for how much even that measure on its own is potentially affecting this. And again, to look at that a little bit more clearly, people are going to make the argument. Lockdowns were important. Pulling kids out of school is important. Wearing masks is really important. And I think this is where, as a society, we often fail to have a holistic enough view as to what's going on to really be able to have balanced conversation and understand that these situations are not black and white. We need to stop treating them like they're black and white. Media needs to stop pushing things as if they're black and white. Government policy has to stop pushing it as a black and white. For more on that, we did another video early on talking about how government does not want you to know all the facts. That video I would recommend watching to understand more about how I think that's a really big issue where government and policy is just too simplified for people. But ultimately, when you look at something like masks, right? And we've been writing articles on this for a very long time. We've assessed PCR tests, we've assessed lockdowns, we've assessed masks. We've looked at the science on both sides of this all over the place. Yes, there's arguments for both sides. It is literally it's so difficult to make sense of what is going on. The point is there's gray areas, and the impact that a lot of these measures are making can be zero to very little. In fact, there's a recent study that came out of Bangladesh, and I'm using this most recent study. There are tons of other ones out there. I'm only using this recent study because it was very rigorous. It involved a ton of people, and it's some of the newest data we have. So I thought, hey, let's use this piece. But this Bangladesh study looked at the effectiveness of mask wearing on comparing certain villages in Bangladesh versus other villages who didn't wear masks. And essentially one of the lead researchers, Ashley Stasinski here, she says, what we really were able to achieve is to demonstrate that masks are effective against COVID-19 even under a rigorous and systematic evaluation. Now, that's her quote. I don't entirely agree with her quote because there's some missing context there that's really important, which is that there are a ton of other studies that have been rigorous that show that the effectiveness is very minor. Interestingly, the actual effectiveness they report in this study is also very minor. Compared to villages that didn't mask, those where masks of any type were worn had about 9% fewer symptomatic cases of COVID-19. The finding was statistically significant and was unlikely to have occurred by chance alone. So in this particular study, they're saying, well, hold on a second, the effect was only about 9%. Now, we're talking about any masks. So we also know that cloth masks, for example, don't really do a whole lot, that certain N95 masks do work the best, providing they're worn properly, which in most cases they're not really worn properly, which is fine. We also know that, virus particles can very easily move through the masks, so there's not a lot of protection there. But what they're trying to make the argument for is that on the aerosol side, we're trying to reduce, right? This is their words, not mine. We're trying to reduce the amount of particulates that are in the air if this is at all possible. Look, we're seeing about a 9% reduction in symptomatic cases. That's what this study is reporting. We can then follow this up by saying, look, we have a recent research study that came out reporting that more than half of positive PCR tests are unlikely to have been infectious. So we can see, there are so many ways, and I'm trying not to overcomplicate things here, but there are so many ways that we can throw challenges back at all of these particular issues and all these particular findings. But the bottom line is with this particular Bangladesh study is that they saw about a 9% reduction. Okay, so consider that PCR tests are inaccurate. Consider that we're talking about a 9% reduction in symptomatic cases, right? Consider that if people are asymptomatic but test positive, they're probably not infectious. Consider that there's science showing the opposite to what this particular study produced in terms of a result. When you consider all of this, you're forced to have to say, look, we're talking about minor differences here. We're talking about we don't know how effective these measures actually are. When you do that, you have to start taking a step back and saying, what other factors what other potential collateral damage are we causing by taking these particular measures that we've been putting in place? And that's kind of the argument that I want to make here with this particular video is we become so obsessed with just, we got to stop cases, 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 right? That we stop looking at the whole picture. We stop looking at the entirety of what's happening. We don't realize the collateral damage that happens all over the place. We've written a number of articles talking about how the amount of people who have missed appointments, the amount of people who have missed diagnoses, the amount of people who missed treatments for preventable diseases that have now died as a result of lockdowns, right? Not a result of overfilled ICUs, but as a result of lockdowns is immense, right? We've seen there's been estimated millions and millions of people who have died as a result of the cost of lockdowns. And now someone's going to come around and say, yeah, but if you didn't lock it down, millions and millions of people would have died from COVID. And you go, well, either way, we can't know because we've already taken the measures we've taken and we can only measure the actual results of those measures. But if we take a step back and we say, hold on a second, there have been treatment options this entire time. And this entire time, treatment options have been shut down over and over and over and over and over again. And we're only looking at this in terms of, look, masks, they might have stopped about 9% of cases. Look, that's it. Yeah, but on the same time, it might have reduced the IQ of children by 20 points. We have to begin looking. There's no clear answer here. My general point is I see so many arguments back and forth all the time about how, this study proved this measure, so we have to do that. Yeah, but did it take into consideration the collateral damage? No. So until we start looking at things more holistically, we're really not going to get anywhere, right? Where you're going to have the people who want to say masks work zero. You're going to have the people who want to say masks save lives. But the truth is in between. There's so much about COVID that's unclear. And we need to have balanced scientific debates. We need to have, perspectives brought in, like some of the stuff that I'm offering from a more trauma-informed perspective where what is the impact of this constant stress that mainstream media is putting out? What is the impact on people's physiology, on their ability to make sense of what's going on how they interact with their children now? What's the impact of all that, right? We take a lot of care in producing media that brings people a sense of calm, that reduces their anxiety. Mainstream media doesn't do that. In fact, most of alternative media doesn't do that. It's all about sensationalism, 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 sensationalism. Someone's coming to get you. Whether it's the virus or whether it's the elite, someone's coming to get you constantly, right? That has a massive impact on us. We believe that we can talk about the reality that there's agendas at play or that there may be some level of risk associated with the virus to particular people. We can talk about that from a grounded, calm, meaningful point of view that doesn't pull us into a position where we're freaking out. We believe we can do that, so we model that. That's what we're creating here. But the general point is there's a massive amount of collateral damage that's going on with the way the vast majority of society is approaching this situation. And I think we're seeing it all the way down to our children. And I think we need to start thinking about things, this is my perspective, from the standpoint of totality. Stop picking the one study that shows this, the one study that shows that, and let's think about what else is affected in our society, what else is being lost. We're losing a sense of community, something that is so important to human beings, that is so important to the health of human beings. This is dramatically being taken away from humans right now. There is a ginormous impact that that has on future deaths, on future health, on quality of life. And it is my position very strongly that we need to stop measuring everything in terms of cases and in terms of deaths, because you're taking out of all of the other aspects of what it means to be human, including all the other people who are going to die as a result of the measures that we're taking. We need to take a step back, look at this on a much more holistic level. I hope what was offered here helps us to consider that and pass that message along to other people. So if you like this video, be sure to share it with others. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. We got more coming up. Thanks so much for watching.